We will give just about a minute for everyone to get in and settled, and we'll get started right away. Well, greetings and welcome to everyone for this 90-minute webinar as a joint venture between buildingSMART and ACC. We have 90 minutes of content for you that we feel they'll be very worthwhile. My name is Chuck Pietra, and I'm one of 3 moderators. And we have also a host of presenters and speakers that are all experts in their field, very far along in their journey with digital twin. They're all associated with airports, so they're right on as far as providing you with very pertinent information on this rapidly changing technology of digital twin. So where are you in your journey with digital twin? Have you been keeping your eye on it as far as attending seminars and so forth? Or have you started to dive into it and look at your data? Because for sure, your airport is probably loaded with data as far as everything from 3D CAD models, where construction documents fall out from the CAD models, that technology is literally 20 plus years old. Have you started to look at BIM and have BIM deliverables to your airport and look at BIM models and systems that are available within the BIM model and how useful that would be, and how some of these technologies like GIS and asset management systems play into the whole role of building your digital twin? Have you actually started looking at implementing a digital twin for your airport recently, and what that means to you as far as data is concerned and dashboards? And have you started to think about, if you had a digital twin in place, what would your dashboards look like? How would you monitor performance? How would you use dashboards to simulate, predict, and inform for performance and so forth? So we're going to talk about a lot of these things and bring some of these concepts together and pretty much focus a lot on the data and where you might be and where you want to go with this. So here are our learning objectives for this 90 minutes. We're going to talk about critical components of achieving digital transformation, including the role of change management, and how to create a culture of data democratization, dismantling organizational silos from the application-centric work approach to a data-centric one. You're going to have to treat digital twin technology a little different than you have treated other technologies that you have maybe implemented in the past, like BIM, asset management, GIS. Understanding the challenges and benefits associated with creating a digital twin, identify and evaluate various technologies, open standards, define lifecycle management principles as they relate to digital twins. So we'll be covering all of this, and we have really a great speaker lineup for you. You will have an opportunity to ask questions. So I'd like to switch over to our second moderator, Julie Jernigan.
Thanks, Chuck. Hi, everyone. My name is Julie Jernigan, and I am the Aviation BIM Manager at RS&H. As Chuck mentioned, I'll be serving as one of the moderators for today's presentation. I want to start off by mentioning some of the ground rules and talk a little bit about the format for today's webinar. So throughout the presentation, we'll have a few poll questions, and we would really appreciate everyone's participation in those. I'd also like to mention that the last 20 minutes or so we've reserved for Q&A. So the Q&A module is open for all attendees, so please submit any questions that you have there throughout the course of the webinar. If you have a specific panelist that you would like to direct your question to, please go ahead and mention their name in the question. You might receive a chat response from one of the speakers or one of the moderators throughout the presentation. And then we'll open up the remaining questions for live response at the end of the presentations today. We also have the chat function open if you would like to post a public comment throughout the presentation. And if you have any suggestions for future webinar topics or just items from today's webinar that you'd like to learn more about, please go ahead and put that in the chat as well. Just keep in mind that any questions will need to go through that Q&A. So Chuck, if you'll go ahead and progress to the next slide. I'm going to kick off with a couple of poll questions that will kind of allow us to get to know who all we have on the webinar today. So you should see poll 1 now. Give everybody a few seconds to respond there. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share those results here. All right, hopefully everybody can see kind of who all we have on the call today and what everybody's sort of experiences with digital twins. So with that, I'll go ahead and hand it off to our next moderator, which is Randy Murphy.
Thank you, Julie. So we're fortunate to have buildingSMART as a co-host today. I've worked in the airport industry implementing geospatial solutions for over 25 years now. And one of the things I've learned over these years is the importance of standards, and particularly open standards that we can use to share data between ourselves. And that's really part of buildingSMART's overall mission. Their goal is to enable our built industry by having data flow seamlessly across all aspects of the built environment and through all phases of a building's life cycle. And in order to do that, we realize that we need open standards, and buildingSMART is doing a lot of great activities to promote open standards and provide services so that people can adopt those open standards. So just a few of the things that are going on with buildingSMART. They have, under the US chapter, they have set up an airport room, and we're fortunate to have Cindy Baldwin of EDCO Tech on the call, and she's the chairperson of that committee. And under that committee, there's several working groups. Some are working on BIM to GIS conversions, simulation, digital twin activities, which is apropos to this webinar. Artificial intelligence and data sharing are some of the activities under those working groups. Just to highlight a few of them, there's a wonderful white paper that was put together by the Digital Twin Subcommittee called Enabling the Ecosystem of Digital Twins. And that's a document you can find at this link that's at the bottom of the slide. They're also working to coordinate with the Airport Council International's Airport Community Recommended Information Services semantic model. It's a lot of words, but what it basically is it's a data model that's been developed by a number of airport professionals that talk about the vast amounts of information that airports have and how to tie it all together. And it can be used as a platform for implementing digital twins and other types of information systems at airports. Next slide. Another key component of buildingSMART USA's activities is to identify and promote open data standards. And one of the committees that I'm part of has developed this list of standards, which we feel might be relevant. This is not all inclusive, but this is at least a starting point for people that are interested in implementing a digital twin to take a look at. Now, there's a lot of words and a lot of references in here. I won't go through them all, but this slide deck will be available as part of a recording that will be made available at the end of the webinar. Next slide. Also under buildingSMART is buildingSMART's International Airport Room. and that's chaired by Arisca, Droog, and Tryfona, who will be presenting shortly. That's a global group that encompasses many countries that are participating and supporting the airport room in their various activities. Similar to the US chapter, they're developing a lot of standards and looking at standards such as the industry foundation classes, which is a part of an ISO standard, and that establishes data interoperability between CAD and BIM and other sources of information so that we can get to the data that's developed in these models that we have. The IFC standard, however, is broad in that it focuses on many industries. And airports arguably have some unique elements to them. And so part of the airport room's activities right now, if you could click the next slide, is to send a series of polls out to industry experts such as yourselves to tell us what you feel is necessary that is unique to airports so that they can be incorporated into the IFC standard through an augmentation of that standard. What that will result in is a standard that can be applied at airports and really encompass all of the different airport needs. So these surveys are something we'd encourage participation in. The link at this bottom of the page, again, the slides will be available through the recording, can be used to get to these polls, and we encourage any feedback that any of you have to offer. So with that, we have another poll. And because standards are so important, we'd really like to find out how familiar you are with different standards that are out there in the industry, and a little bit about your organization as well. So if you could take a few minutes and answer this poll, we'd appreciate it. Great. So it looks like people are somewhat familiar with the open standards. Some aren't familiar, and a few are very familiar. So hopefully we can get everyone more aware of these standards through the course of this webinar. And it looks like in terms of the current work approach, it's a little bit both data and application, which I think is a good balance. So thank you for your input. Okay, next, Maya and Arisca are going to talk about some of the great activities they have going on at Schiphol.
Awesome. Thank you, Randy. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar. Just to start, a quick introduction. My name is Arisca Droog, and I will be presenting today together with my colleague, Tryfona. We are both working as data engineers for the asset management department of Schiphol Airport. And our main focus at the asset management department is on designing and maintaining our data model, which we will tell you a little bit more about throughout this presentation. We're also both members of buildingSMART, as Randy mentioned. And yeah, the main focus there is the airport entities project, which we will also go in a little bit more detail about later on. Next slide. So before diving into like all the technical details of Schiphol's information management strategy, I would actually like to start by giving you some facts about Schiphol Airport, which is located just outside of Amsterdam in the Netherlands. To start, Schiphol Airport is more than 100 years old, so you can imagine the amount of data that we currently have, but also the amount of data that is currently missing, making it pretty much a big challenge to manage all of our data. At the same time, Schiphol is not allowed to grow in square meters, and it is limited to its number of flights per year. As many of you might know, Holland is a pretty small country, so we do have some limitations with growing. So we need to start working more efficiently with our data. With that, Schiphol, and I'm sure any other airport, is always under construction and therefore constantly changing. So just the terminal alone has more than 1,000 changes each year. So these changes come from many diverse projects, some small like modifications, but others are very big projects that take years, like building a new terminal. And so with all of these changes, we have to deal with a lot of unique and complex assets. We have building assets, terrain, utilities, and many more. And with that being said, Schiphol does want to know where all of its assets are located, what their status is, and having a digital copy that is reliable and available at all times. So as data will continue to increase, it was necessary for Schiphol to look into a digital transformation where we are focused on a data-driven approach to asset management. Next slide. So looking at BIM at Schiphol as one of the solutions, we have to keep a few things in mind. Not just Schiphol, but all airports are truly like small cities. They are a mixed environment with a wide variety of assets. And next to the different asset types that were mentioned in the previous slide, we also have a lot of different types of networks. We have electrical networks, water networks, or domains such as security that do require a lot of different information need throughout all phases of its life cycle. Also, as mentioned in the previous slides, airports can have tens to hundreds of projects, both inside the terminal, but also outside on airside, for example. And all of these projects are usually happening simultaneously, and they also include a lot of different stakeholders. So keeping all of this in mind, Schiphol started looking at BIM and more specifically openBIM in order to optimize the exchange of correct and up-to-date information during all of the stages of the life cycle. So we believe that in order to optimize our data management, smooth processes and clear agreements are absolutely essential because this will eventually lead to better control of your information management systems. But we can also detect errors in an early stage, and hopefully in the long run, it will all lead to a reduction in costs. Next slide.
So for interoperability, to avoid risks and to ensure a future-proof and a long-term solution, Schiphol Airport cannot support just one specific software vendor. So the focus is, apart from the native files, also the openBIM standards like IFC, BCF, IDS, and others. And as an organization, we understand that open standards and open shareable information basically unlocks more efficient, transparent, and collaborative ways of working throughout the entire life cycle of assets. In the next slide, you will see a list of all the benefits of using open standards. So as a big organization who basically collaborates with many internal and external stakeholders, we use open standards, and the main reason of using them is the efficiency in our daily work and the transparency that they provide within and out the organization. They increase the innovation, improve the information transfer and usage. They facilitate broader adoption, and most importantly, they ensure the reuse of the data in the future, in future applications. Next slide, please.
So in order to implement those open standards as much as possible within Schiphol, we believe it is important to look at what the rest of the world is doing, to collaborate with other airports or parties working for airports in order to standardize the way we are currently working. So we do this as Schiphol by being part of the buildingSMART International Airport Domain. And the mission of the airport domain is to develop and deploy open digital standards for the airport environment. The purpose of the airport domain is to deliver value to airport owners and operators, and therefore for all customers and users of airports. So we are actually lucky enough to work on developing those standards with people from all over the world. The airport domain's main focus right now is actually on identifying entities that are currently missing from the IFC schema, but are crucial for airports. So there's a working group that we are part of that has identified a list of specific airport objects and has mapped them to IFC 4.3. And as Randy mentioned, the surveys were distributed to gather input from specialists from all over the world. And the results will eventually be published to the buildingSMART Data Dictionary so that it is accessible for anyone who is interested in using it. Next slide. So to give you a better idea of what we're talking about, we have gathered just a few examples of some of the airport-specific objects that are not part of the IFC schema today. So when those objects are not defined in the IFC schema, it is actually not clear for the different stakeholders in the supply chain what entities, types, or properties to use, causing a lot of inconsistencies and a lot of discussion in the supply chain. Next slide.
So basically at the airport, different parties are involved in several projects. Think of designers, contractors, subcontractors. So it is important for organizations like Schiphol to request and maintain a uniform data structure. And this can be achieved with clear agreements, clear information delivery manual, and exchange information requirements. So taking one specific object like the baggage conveyor here, that needs to be modeled in our models, and we need to use it for the maintenance and operations. If every different party is using a different name and a different mapping to the IFC Open International Standard that we actually received, then we are going to end up with a lot of inconsistencies. So one could call it, for example, baggage conveyor, another belt conveyor or conveyor. And therefore, with clear agreements on the needs of our organization and with clear definitions on the data structure and on the IFC mapping, basically the exchange between different parties is feasible and can lead to correct decision-making, as well as more efficient processes within the organization and better collaboration between different disciplines and parties. So only by following the requirements of the client, and in this case, calling the object baggage conveyor and mapping it to the IFC conveyor segment dot belt conveyor, which we agree within our project, for example, within buildingSMART, then proper information exchange can be achieved. Next slide.
So getting back to Schiphol, after telling you a little bit more about open standards and why we believe it's so important. Back in 2019, we introduced a new digital environment at Schiphol Airport, where our focus is actually now on an open and object-oriented approach of exchanging information instead of working in all different silos. We have identified 5 different steps in this strategy, which we will explain in more detail in the next slides. So to start, we have the project phase. Back to this slide. To start, we have the project phase to our upper left side. Then we have our maintenance and operation to the bottom right side, or the bottom left side. And it's kind of important to note there that Schiphol has actually outsourced its asset maintenance, including its data management. So that's why you see MC, which stands for main contractor, because they are actually responsible for maintaining all of our assets, including the data. And then between the main contractor and Schiphol, you see the data interface, which Maya will tell you a little bit more about later on. And then in the center, you see the environment of Schiphol Airport, where to the kind of left top, you see the data dictionary of Schiphol, where we have defined all of our information needs per asset type. And then kind of below, you see the central data environment where we store all of our assets. Next slide. So to start, I'm going to start over by the project phase. We actually are using the standards ISO 19650, but also IFC international standard to really describe our product and process requirements throughout all of the project phases to ensure the best possible alignment of the project data with the maintenance organization. So by doing that, we're actually securing the information needs of asset management, which is ASM here at Schiphol, the project organization, but also some of the other stakeholders like operations. And we believe that by aligning with the maintenance organization, by really specifying those information requirements, we will be more in line with the whole supply chain. So there's no more discussion of what needs to be delivered, and we'll actually be able to perform data validation and improve the processes between the different stakeholders. Next slide.
So we are defining all our information needs in an information model, as it was mentioned from Arisca, in our, basically it's called data dictionary of Schiphol, that's how we call it, where the data is saved and shared as linked data to all our stakeholders. So the data is arriving in a uniform data structure, which has been defined in this data model, this data dictionary. The data dictionary contains the object decomposition, the properties that are needed per asset type, their geometry specifications, definitions, terms and relationships with specific type of documents and other things. So this model is conformed the agreements and the specifications that we are requesting in the project phase. And in this way, we are constantly updating our data dictionary of Schiphol and our specifications together with the contractors and with us as owners of the assets. In addition, multiple app mappings and links to national and international standards like IFC and NLSB, also links to existing vocabularies like the bot ontology and ontologies from other business units are also included, as well as making this model more powerful and better integrated within and out of the organization. In the next slide, you can see that our information model is published in a user interface. Here it is an example of the user interface of this model where it provides a way to easier explain to people that are non-technical the data structure and the requested data per object. And in this data model, we are defining the different types of assets. Think of, for example, the elevator, sprinklers, and others. And the requirements that we need for each one of them, like their properties, their documents, and relations to other objects within the data model. In the example of the next slide, you can see that in the user-friendly environment, for the specific asset type called, for example, sewage pumping system, we have added some photos. We can also add a definition and labels in different languages, or alternative ones in the same language, which might be used from different stakeholders within the organization. Last but not least, every concept has a unique identification for the automatic distinction from the other concepts. And this is depicted in the last red box, which is called ED. The stakeholders have the opportunity to request a change in the information requirements of an object in case, for example, something is missing, or it is wrong, or it should be removed completely from the data model. In the next slide, you see the links to the existing standards, as we mentioned before. So our data model includes all the information requirements and has links to open standards. The two main links that we have and we maintain is towards the IFC, which is the openBIM international standard for the built environment. And another link that we are maintaining is towards the NLSFB at the bottom right side, which is the national standard in the Netherlands. In the next slide, you can see more details about the data interface. So in the maintenance phase, the focus is on the population of a database with structured data according to our business needs. So the data is arriving through a data interface from the main contractors in our database, following the information needs that have been defined within the data dictionary of Schiphol, within our data model. So from there, the different systems can get the data they need, and the data arrive in an XML form, which follows the IFC4 Add2 version of the IFC Open International Standard. The reason for that is to not reinvent the wheel and use actually existing standards within our workflow. In the next slide, how we call it the CDV, it's the central data environment. The data is stored in a data repository, which consists of a triple stored database, a document database, and a geo database for the geometries. There are also APIs being created to distribute the needed data to other systems and stakeholders. And the most important part are the validation engines, which check the data before storing them in the database. So these engines are getting updated with more and more validations, aiming to increase the data quality. So this will improve the processes and the decision-making of the organization, due to the fact that the specialists will be able to find, access, and use the data for their daily needs within the organization. And in the last slide, you will basically see, this is one of the last slides within our information management strategy, and it's about the applications. So basically, at the bottom, you see that end users have access to their data through several applications, which are being fed with data by the triple data store. Some applications are, for example, the Schiphol maps, GIS, the facility management system, Maximo, the electronic document management system, EDMS, and others. And also a data quality dashboard is created, which is very important and shows the data quality of the data that we have. In the next slide.
Yes, so to finish off, we did not show you any pictures of BIM models because we actually wanted to talk a little bit more about the importance of like taking a step back and really looking at what your requirements are per asset type and really securing that in a data model, and at the same time looking at your processes. So we believe that clear agreements are very important. So we did that by introducing our BIM protocol, but also an information delivery manual and a BIM execution plan as part of the project phases, so that there's no more discussion about what needs to be delivered in the different project phases, and so that the handover goes a little bit more smoothly. We also came to the conclusion that working together throughout all of the phases of the asset lifecycle is essential. And I think that's also still our biggest challenge, is to get everyone on board in working in this new data environment. We believe that the use of open standards is beneficial throughout the entire lifecycle, and it will actually help the entire supply chain. So there's no more discussion about what entity to use in the model because it's already been defined by the client. And last but not least, it definitely takes time to change the mindset of the people and organizations involved. Being in an airport, we have to deal with a lot of different stakeholders, a lot of different parties doing work for the airport, and we have to get them all aligned with us. So keep in mind that it takes time and a lot of explanation. And yeah, that's what we learned from now on. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Arisca and Maya. So before we transition to our next presenter, I'm going to go ahead and launch our next set of poll questions. So give everybody a few seconds to respond there, if you would. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share our results here. It's like a lot of different answers here. All right, thank you everybody for your input there. So we'll go ahead and move to our next presenter, which will be Brendan Dillon.
Thanks, Julie. Next slide. Brendan Dillon, I work for Denver International Airport. I've been with DEN for about almost 10 years now, managing our DFI program. A little bit about DEN before we get going. We have 53 square miles of campus, which makes us the largest airport in North America by area, 17 million square feet of facilities, 69.2 million passengers in last year. This year, we're looking at an interesting growth to 78 or 79 million. And one of our fun facts, we have 15,000 plus acres of active farmland at Denver Airport. So we really have a lot going on at our facility. Next slide. We manage the digital facilities and infrastructure team, which in most cases encompasses essentially BIM. We deal with a lot of consultants and contractors who will tell us that they know how to do BIM. And frequently, the answer is yes, they know how to do an aspect of BIM, but they're not accustomed as much to the actual information side of things. So we try to start things off on the right foot and get them asking questions about, okay, what do you mean by digital facilities and infrastructure? We are part of DEN's asset management program, and really we are oriented heavily, much like Schiphol, around the information and not just the model element aspect of things. Next slide. We support a number of organizations within DEN. For starters, asset management. We are part of asset management. They are our raison d'etre. But we also support finance, global communications, maintenance, operations, planning and design. There really isn't an aspect of Denver Airport that we don't support, including fire department, police department, it pretty much everything. Next slide. What we really work with, as I mentioned, we're an information group. We're looking at principally three types of information. First type of information is location information. Second type, spatial information. These are the parts that most folks working around BIM are most accustomed to, where we really depart from what most owners are doing is in our emphasis on asset information. And this is where the challenges come in as far as capturing correct information. Next slide. And as mentioned, we're pushing this information to a lot of areas and a lot of systems. Some of these connections are direct. We're going directly into systems such as Maximo or GIS or CMMSs. And in other cases, we're pushing information a little more indirectly, either because of the workflows or because it's going through another system entirely before it gets to the end users in those systems. Next slide. So as mentioned, it's all about the data, right? And bad data is so much worse than no data. When you have no data, you know, well, geez, we've got a big hole here. We need to fill that hole, or we need to work around that hole. When you have bad data, you don't always know quite how bad that data is. Is it bad because it's incomplete? Or is it bad because it's inaccurate? You've got, you know, information that says that it is one manufacturer when actually that was what was entered for information as far as design level, but the contractor actually installed something different. So enhancing and ensuring data integrity is really the biggest thing that we do. Next slide. Our reference documents, our standards are really how we get there. It's where we start. You heard Arisca and Maya talk about this a lot. If you're working in the digital twin sector, you can't talk enough, I think, about references and standards. We use ISO 19650 as sort of our backbone for how we build our program. It doesn't necessarily define any of our data information, but it gives us the structure that we work around when we do build those ontologies. Back one. Our principal, sorry, back one. Thanks. Yes, thank you. Our principal standards come from our DFI design standards manual. We have design standards for pretty much everything that gets done at Denver Airport, whether that's the architectural discipline, civil work, mechanical, plumbing, signage. In our case, the design standards manual is defining exactly what information we need, what format we need it in, when we need it delivered, who needs to deliver it, how they need to deliver it, and so on. We also use the 2021 BIM Forum level of development. The LOD specification is really principally geared towards the model aspect, which is why we use it, because trying to define that information ourselves would probably drive us crazy. So it's a fantastic document for setting that standard for us so we can focus on the data. Next slide. As valuable as the standards are, if you don't have the right contract documents in place to define exactly how that information is going to be, or to ensure that information is going to be delivered the way that you want it, then those standards almost don't matter. You could have the most perfect set of standards in the world, and if your contract doesn't say, hey, make sure this gets delivered and when, then you're never going to get it. We have our typical standard for our designers is our Exhibit R. It lays out the obligations in relation to the execution plan, which is something that we implement on every project at DEN. We approach the execution plan a little bit differently, probably than a lot of organizations. On a lot of projects, you'll see project execution plans almost essentially come down to being the standards for that particular project. Well, we have our standards. So really what we're using the execution plan for is more in terms of defining exactly what might be special about this project, defining the scope, defining the stakeholders, defining the who is going to be responsible for what, and then any exceptions that may be appropriate for a particular project. We try to avoid the exceptions, but exceptions do happen. Our DFI matrix takes the LOD matrix, the LOD specification of BIM forum and turns it into a functional document for us. What exactly needs to be delivered at each deliverable phase, and to what information is the information, sorry, to what level is the information developed? This is another document that is also modified by the execution plan. We have our standard DFI matrix, and then it gets updated based on the needs and capabilities of particular projects, consultants, contractors. And then we have the other standard DEN contract documents that aren't as BIM heavy, but we have to make sure that we review those on a regular basis to ensure that they reflect our most current standards. Next slide. Oh, next. Yeah, thanks. So really, this is the information comes down to capturing the model elements. Next slide. And then we have the review process, because you have to be going in and making sure that you're getting this. So we conduct a model review process where we're going in with basically every deliverable and checking all of that. And I'll go into that a little more detail in a minute. Next slide. And then the next level of information is, so how is that performance being tracked? You know, we're tracking compliance. How does that look over time for a particular consultant, for a particular discipline, for even a particular project manager or member of my staff? How do I measure their performance? Next. So why are you looking at a slide of M&Ms? Well, next slide. Back in the 80s, this really awesome rock band called Van Halen had this reputation for being kind of prima donnas. They were hard rockers who, they had this ridiculous requirement in their contract where in their dressing room, there had to be a bowl full of M&Ms, and all of the brown M&Ms had to be picked out. And people thought, these guys, they're nuts. Well, turns out they were nuts, but in a good way. This was one of the cleverest acts of QC that I've ever seen. They knew that when they walked into that new venue, if they looked in that bowl of M&Ms and they saw brown M&Ms, they knew that this venue had not read and complied with every single line of that contract. This was their test, and it gave them a heads up of, okay, we need to check everything. If they saw that the M&Ms were all there, all the brown M&Ms had been picked out, they knew that they had a higher degree of confidence in compliance with their contract. Well, what does that have to do with BIM? Our BIM standards are very objectively easy to check. We are able to do a very quick compliance check on all of our standards within about a day of receiving that initial deliverable. And since that initial deliverable is coming in with every package deliverable, we're able to give a heads up to the other reviewers and say, hey, you know, it looks like this consultant is doing a fantastic job on the BIM stuff. It's an easy thing. A lot of folks overlook it. They think it's not going to be checked. When we see that it has all been complied with, we know that this is probably going to be a really good package. If we go in and we see that, geez, this stuff's a mess, there's shortcuts, there's things that are just straight up ignored, we can give the other reviewers a heads up that this is going to need some extra eye check. And 99% of the time, we're spot on that. Next slide. So as part of our information reviews, we don't call them model reviews anymore. We're looking at a lot of different areas. We're looking at the overall model setup and the model elements, but mostly what we're looking at is the information. We're looking at approximately 45 different line items on every single model review. 18 of those line items are what we've identified as critical. 90% on, if they get 90% on the other stuff, we're not so worried. We don't worry too much about is the font off? Are the line types a little bit tweaked because they wanted to do things the way they're more used to? That's not going to bother our downstream information. What's going to affect that really is the asset information, location information. Is everything phased and put together the way that it has to be in order for us to work with this information as a facility through our operational phases. Next slide. We perform these reviews at every single package submittal for every single project that happens at Denver Airport. Whether that project is a McDonald's or a new club lounge for an airline, or replacing a electrical panel in an electrical room, or expanding the concourses by adding 20 new gates. Every single one of them gets checked. And we track that information over time so that we can see how particular consultants will perform. And this gives us a heads up on future projects so that we can see, oh, consultant ABC is working on this project. They've been rock solid in the past. We know that we're going to be rock solid on this project. We've got a good foundation for success. We also perform interim reviews. We don't track those, but we do leverage them to inform our discussions with those consultants over the course of the project. Next slide. When it comes to data fidelity, one of the most useful tools that we have is our LiDAR program. We have 17 million square feet of facilities. About 8 to 9 million square feet of those have been scanned and are currently scanned. I don't just mean they were scanned 10 years ago and we've got them sitting in a file. We've got a current scan of those. That gives us the opportunity to check against what we have and what we receive from our consultants as far as spatial and modeling information. Next slide. And all of this feeds into the various systems that we have at DEN, our Maximo systems, our SCADA systems, and our GIS systems. Excuse me. Once we get that information all into a single system, well, there isn't a single system yet. Next slide. And that's one of the challenges that we're dealing with at DEN is John Madden had this saying, if you're an American football fan, when you have two quarterbacks, you don't have a quarterback. Well, right now, we don't have a quarterback at DEN. We're still trying to build that single source of truth. Next slide. We've got a number of, previous slide, yes. We've got a number of systems that are close, and we are still working on getting them pulled together to the degree that you see at Schiphol or Vancouver coming up. So thank you for your time today, and we look forward to bringing you an update when we get it all finally brought together.
Great, thanks, Brendan. All right, we're at our second to last set of poll questions. I'll give everybody a few minutes to answer those. Appreciate your response and glad everybody is still with us. Just a few more seconds here. We've got a lot of really good responses coming in. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close this for the sake of time and share our results. Really, really interesting mix. All right, with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to our next panelist, Jason Williams, who's brave enough to share a live demo with us. Jason.
Thank you, Julie, and good morning, everyone from Vancouver. It's an absolute pleasure to be joining you from my home here today, and obviously representing the Vancouver Airport Authority, which sits on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam people. Really just want to acknowledge elders past and present. As you just heard, I am going to do a live demo here. So I will share my screen and we'll get into the demo. Just shifting up the format, obviously. Please feel free to ask as many questions as you'd like. And I will try and answer them throughout the webinar here because I can see all the questions come in. Okay, let's see this in action. All right, hopefully you can see my screen here. And what I'm showing is our Ops Situational Awareness tool. So this is a live snapshot of the Vancouver Airport right now in real time. You can see here that it's just nearly 7:50 in the morning local time. And I'm showing you a map of our airfield and our terminal here. So this speaks to some of our data integrations that we have with the digital twin. The first being a direct integration with GIS. So our GIS engineering team, an established process, we pull in all of that data to populate this view that you can see here. And we've got that enriched data available inside this tool. So I can search for a room here as an example. And it'll take me to that room, or it'll show me where it is. I can see it there. And the information about that room. Really, really useful for folks who use this tool for maintenance, or our guest experience team who need to wayfind through what is the largest building in BC with over 4,000 different rooms and a variety of obscure machine rooms that are located in obviously difficult places. The next big data integration that you see here is these icons that you can see moving around on screen. So what you've got here is a direct integration with NAV Canada, which is the agency responsible for air traffic control here in Vancouver. This data is ADS-B transponder data, so altitude, speed, geographic location, obviously, and flight call sign, aircraft type, as well as local radar that we have at the airport, which picks up things that don't have transponders. So that's why you can see quite a few vehicles here. We are doing a lot of maintenance at the moment on our airfield, so there's a bit of pavement work going on, which is why there's quite a few vehicles you can see moving around. The next big integration that we have is that with our data hub. So we have a very well-established data hub, which captures just every kind of data source that you can think of. How many passengers we've had moving through the terminal, the load factor of flights that we've had in the past, and forecasting what our load factor is going to be in the future. That's very important for us because we need to try and predict where we're going to see passengers move throughout our terminal spaces. So we've got a lot of connection facilities. We actually have 3 terminals within this big building. We have domestic, international, and transborder, which is a pre-clearance facility to the United States. There's a lot of passengers that move in between these different processes, and there's bottlenecks obviously involved in the movement of those passengers. So as an example, just for a domestic passenger just coming through from the curbside or you know, anywhere in Vancouver, going through the security screening process, we call it pre-board screening. Very, very similar process to what's in the United States, which is done by TSA. You can see here that we model out the prediction on how many passengers we expect are going to go through that facility. So if I click on this particular point of interest here, we can see that right now. And I can see that in the future here, you'll just have to ignore our little bug here with the data that's missing. We have our forecast of passengers in the future and our current threshold of processing capacity. Yellow is good. That means that we're reaching our threshold. If it goes red, that means we're exceeding our threshold. And you can see here we have some historic wait times that are provided to us by CATSA, which is the Canadian equivalent of TSA. We also, we don't just trust our CATSA data, we also have our own sensor data that we feed into this. And you can see here, I can pull in that sensor data. This is telling us that right now in real time, we have 4 of the 5 available security screening lanes open. There is 63 people currently waiting in a line, and their wait time right now is about 5 minutes, just gone down to 4 minutes as the numbers have just changed there. So you can see there's a little bit of a difference between the CATSA data and our own data, which is why we've invested in doing sensor installations. And again, you can see here for our check-in facilities, this is Air Canada, their regular check-in queue. There's 5 of 9 lanes open. There's 10 people waiting in the line. They're experiencing about a 7-minute wait time. And for the priority folks, there's 3 of 9 positions open, 10 people waiting in queue. Not such a good day to be a premium passenger, a slightly longer wait time for them. But obviously that shifts minute by minute, and we generate alerts based on these metrics so we can help our various stakeholders move passengers through the terminal more efficiently. You can see here another point of interest is this this item here that's flashing red. This is a camera which has edge processing on it, and it's basically picking up loitering vehicles. So the idea here is that it'll highlight a vehicle. As you can see, the one in red there has been parked longer than 15 minutes. We don't like having vehicles parked up on the curb front. It's a safety and security issue, but it's also a processing issue. So moving those along is very important to us. This is a trial of a camera that we've positioned there, and obviously we can roll this out across the entire curb front, and then we can do automated dispatch to our curb front officials so that they can move these vehicles along more efficiently. Again, I'll just go to a different area of the terminal. We'll go to level 2, and this is our international arrivals area. We have similar data here where we've got the count of all of our passengers coming through from big international flights. You can see we've just had a flurry of those come through this morning. And if I move throughout the day, you can see at lunchtime here, we have quite a big peak of flights coming through. And through into the evening, you can see that we might be close to exceeding our thresholds. So it's really, really great data to help plan out where we need to put guest experience folks to help people move through the terminal, but also to help our airport operations folks work with different stakeholders, like the people who control the border, which is the Canadian Border Services Agency, like the people who control the security screening points, which is CATSA, as I mentioned earlier. So there's a variety of collaborative decision-making that happens with this tool. And it's obviously been a huge benefit for us since we invested in this, and that investment started in 2021 at the height of the pandemic. The platform that you see here is built on the Unity gaming platform. So this is a client application that's running on a Windows machine. I'll just show you here. I also have this on an iOS device. So I'll just hold that up to the camera. You can see the same interface there running on my phone. And this has a few more other features with it. We can create service requests directly into Maximo with this, which help us avoid folks calling our dispatchers, as an example. It all gets done through the digital twin. So there's many use cases for this from an operational perspective. And that's really where we focused our efforts on our digital twin. It's more so towards operations. But then there's more things that we can do. Connecting data together allows us to look at things in different ways. So I can pick on a flight here as an example. This is AC, what have we got here? This is Air Canada. This is an Airbus A320. You can see here that it's going to Toronto. You can see here that we're calculating the fuel burn here. So this is ticking up, and this is really based on the aircraft type. We know that the aircraft has a registration, so we can look up the engines that are fitted to that aircraft. We've worked with both aircraft manufacturers, the leading ones anyway, Airbus and Boeing, and tried to get as much engine data as we can to calculate very, very accurately, to be honest, the fuel burn rate of aircraft. So this allows us to understand what the GHG emissions are. This allows us to understand various things related to time. So you can see this particular aircraft spent 1 minute and 30 seconds before it departed the stand. It's been taxiing for 10 minutes, and obviously it's about to take off here. So we've got the overall time. That's going to allow us to set a fantastic baseline of a normal operation at YVR. And then we've got the ability to measure the impact of operational changes, so gating strategy changes. We've got 2 runways, so understanding which runway should be used for certain flights, and then measure the impact of all of those changes. So it's a great way of collecting data, using it to make operational decisions, measuring those operational decisions. And then in the future, we're obviously going to be adding in the capability of doing simulation. So taking an asset like a runway out of service, and a variety of other great initiatives around simulation. So yes, it does look like there's a lot of alerts there today. It's mostly yellow, which is good, which means we're just close to a threshold, or some of these flights are ever so slightly delayed. Another use case, which I can't really demonstrate right now, is we do have baggage alerts. So if a flight comes in, we know that it's come in, and we start a timer. And if that timer exceeds 30 minutes and we haven't seen baggage in our baggage system, we raise an alert for our ops folks to chase up with the ground handlers or the airline to help them understand or to try and figure out if there's a problem or if we've got an issue with our baggage system. So just all of those different data elements coming together create some really great use cases for the operation. I'll just touch quickly on our timeline here. So these are all of the different alerts that have come up in the past and what we have coming up in the future. Again, lots of yellow. There are some red ones there, so I could probably go to this red alert here and see where that's going to be. So it looks like that's going to be in our security screening facility and domestic here. We're going to have a big mad rush of passengers coming through at around lunchtime. So what we will be doing there is working with our stakeholders to try and make sure that there's enough people manning the security screening lanes, and our guest experience folks can obviously help with some of the prerequisites required with security screening. And that goes right the way through to the whole day. Sorry, it's just refreshing there. And we can see through to the next day as well for future planning. All of those alerts are tied to a live flight schedule, and it gets updated every 3 minutes. So as the schedule changes for the different flights, the alerts may move throughout the day. So our best plan for a normal day could change dramatically if Toronto or Calgary Airport are experiencing very, very big weather events, or if there's a system outage with an airline. Those sorts of things can have a huge impact on our operation. A couple of other things, just highlighting the overall count of passengers that we have in the terminal right now, hour by hour, and the various areas that they move to. I can just pick on a flight here and look at this gate. This is a particular flight from Air Canada. Estimated passenger count there, it's 297 domestic connections. So you can kind of see how we take all of that data and then model out where we're expecting the passengers to be moving throughout the terminal space. So I know I've given you a really big download very, very quickly there. That was a very quick presentation. We are quite tight for time here, so I'm going to leave it there. I will leave this offer out there if folks would like to see more of this and dive more into some of the other modules that we have with our digital twin. We do monthly demo days, and I do welcome anyone who wants to join that to email us, and I'll put that email somewhere in the chat here, and you can arrange to join one of our open demo days. We're always happy to share what we're doing with the digital twin, and the evolution of this tool is changing every single month, so it's nice to be a part of that journey. Thank you so much for the time, and I'll try and get to some of the questions. Please feel free to ask them as the webinar continues.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason. Really cool to see how all that information comes together in real time. So before our final presenter, I'm going to go ahead and launch our final set of poll questions. And I'm just going to leave that up for a short amount of time because we are right up on our time here. So if you'll please put in your answers as quick as possible, and then we'll get to our last presenter here. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close that down. I'll share the results here briefly. And with that, I'll go ahead and hand it off to Kelly Watt.
Thank you. Appreciate having me here. I'm the Digital Twin Program Manager at AI Machine Learning Programs at DFW. Next slide. So, I thought I'd start my conversation with why we're here today. There has been some fundamental shifts and changes in technology, whether it be on the spatial side with reality capture, mobile mapping, and other ways to rapidly capture as-built conditions and to construct building information models, or be able to use design models in different ways, to also looking at real-time data, looking at analytics that we can apply over that data, and then kind of on the intelligence layer where the AI machine learning can live. So I think it's in that context where we can actually make this digital twin concept come to life, where in the past that we maybe would have been challenged. Next slide. So I think with any digital twin program, we really need to be cognizant. I think there's been a lot of discussion here around the project and how a design project is based on data, based on accurate data standards and governance, and how that needs to flow into the owner's operations and maintenance. So really needing to have the stakeholders at the table at the beginning of the project, understanding how we want data to flow, in what format, and also sitting down with the operators in the field, understand how they use data, what data they're currently consuming, what they are not consuming, where are some of the gaps. So It's really critical for us to move from this project-based thinking into enterprise-based thinking, especially with DFW when we have about 160 projects going on at a time. And to us, this is really important with the amount of construction we're going to be going through here in the next number of years with our new Terminal F, our new E-Cup plant, the rehab of Terminal C, and many other projects. Getting a grip on how this data flows is a really good opportunity, and it's also something that's going to take a lot of effort. So we funded this through an investment on every capital project to make sure that our digital infrastructure is being created and quality checked, and our information management is sound. And that's also including investments in enterprise content management tools and things of that nature. So next slide. So on the other side of things, when we receive that data, we have to also understand the relationship. So we've had some discussions around relationships of data and ontologies and mapping systems and things of that nature, but also the semantics relationships. So really getting a grip on the data science side of this is really important. There's the spatial component, there's the information management, and there's the data science that really are going to need to come together to kind of be able to act on data as we're hoping to, not just to visualize data, but to have predictive recommendations and insights so that we can get ahead of the curve here. Next slide. So I think with a lot of these programs, the attention comes from an executive at a conference or maybe a webinar or something like this, and the visualization stack is what's really gets a lot of attention. I'm glad this presentation so far, we've talked a lot about the standards, the governance, the less sexy parts of what a digital twin needs to be, but really, kind of evaluating our current technology stack. What do we use for CMMS platforms? In our case, many CMMS platforms. We have 5 different platforms that we're using. What are the data sources that we have available from an IoT perspective as well? We have 5 different building automation systems at different life cycles, right? So
hey, Kelly,
how do we deal with that data? Yes.
Apologies for the interruption. Chuck, could we switch the screen so that we're seeing the full view and not just the presenter view?
There we go.
Perfect. Thank you.
So it's beyond just having the stack. Is how are these going to talk to each other, and beyond just the stack, it's a lot about the people in the process. How are we going to get people in process to work with this data in new ways? So the projects that we're currently working on the bottom here, we have an isolated learning lab area where we're going to experiment with various technologies and integrations and automations so that we can game out how we best feel we're going to be able to execute on. This is one of our newer areas at the airport too, so we're not having the challenges of dealing with legacy data and things of that nature. We have proved out from previous proofs of concept what's working, so we're rapidly looking to roll that out wide throughout the airport, additional terminals, non-terminal buildings. And then we have some specific use cases around passenger boarding bridges, conveyances, and our water system. We have over 200 miles of potable water, reclaimed water, different irrigation systems, and leak management and water management is important to us so that we have that business continuity and operations, and we're not going to have these issues that disrupt those operations, especially on airfield. So the water management and also pavement management are 2 things outside of the airport that are important to our projects. Next slide. So again, as I mentioned, it is about information management. It's about interoperability too. One of the challenges that we see today is with the advance of analytics, every vendor wants to take an IoT sensor, make it proprietary, slap on an API to an integration of a software solution that they own, attach a data storage solution, attach an analytics solution, attach a data streaming solution, give you an API, and you get to pay for everything. And have the pleasure of having another interface. We have over 600 software platforms at the airport today. We're looking to consolidate, not grow that. So really, we set some standards in a new manual that's attached to our DCM on how we buy sensors and how we want data to flow with an open architecture like MQTT through a broker. And that's been really fundamental in changing how we even buy as owners. We're trying to set the terms with our vendors, how we want to buy technology and how we want data to flow into our business systems. We want to do our own data streaming, our own data storage, and we want to make sure that we can change out a vendor in the future if we need to. If the vendors have good solutions, there's no reason to change, but we want to have that flexibility, interoperability. So it's not just the information management, it's also the live data, and that communication of live data is really important to us at the airport today. And between these two, we have to be able to relate those data sets in a meaningful way. Next slide. So when we look at the strategy of digital twin, we really need to step back and do strategic planning. It's really, really critical. So in the strategic road mapping or planning of what we're doing at the airport, we go through a very detailed needs analysis. We look at the dependencies of each of the business systems that we're wanting to integrate. We look at cost, resources, priority schedule, risks, complexity, all these different nuances that can really derail a project. And also the budget and the leadership approval and the leadership direction on these projects before we map out those projects. Next animation. And then from here, again, going deeper on evaluating the quality of the data. So we have a very good data model from our infrastructure, digital infrastructure, facility infrastructure guidelines and standards, which is great, but there are a lot of existing systems that we need to improve that data, different ways that in the past we have named things and big gaps in the data on the operations side. So improving that quality is really important to us and matching those schemas so that we have good data flow. And then beyond that, again, as I mentioned, we need to have the relationships of that data so that we can apply the analytics and machine learning, et cetera. So one of the things that we did with our IoT data is typically programmed by a programmer, and no real standards have been applied. So we're remapping all those endpoints to a standard. So every single endpoint in our airport will have a specific standard that we can pull in the future, which is great. And then doing report by exception and full data streaming. So we're not looking at 3 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. We're looking at actual real-time data. And that's really important when we start to merge different business systems. Well, when did this piece of data occur as opposed to this piece of data? Because you can get a lot of errors when that data is not lining up in terms of timing. Next part. And then again, we're going to have different interfaces. You know, when we talked with Denver on a single source of truth or an actual interface that does it all, I don't know if we fully believe that will be the case. I mean, the data model, all of that needs to be kind of a consistent data with information model, et cetera. But as we start to consume data, we consume it differently. When we're in the IOC, we can have these big screens. We want limited information, we want actionable information. If we're working on a computer workstation, we may want data to be kind of consumed in a different way. And definitely from a mobile device in the field, there are different nuances and different needs from different stakeholders. Next slide. So mapping that out, we also want to map the ROI. So the ROI starts with involving finance. So having finance at the table that can pull numbers for you, that can work through, you know, what is our cost avoidance, what is our cost savings on, you know, certain use cases that we're looking for. Really having deep dives with various stakeholders, from those that are doing the work to managers to service providers to leadership, to understand where they think that value could be, and then to validate that. Sometimes we also are going to put up the use case that we're most concerned with because it's the problem we're having today. So really kind of taking a step back and let's look at 5 years of data. Let's look at 3 years of data on the cost. So before we make that decision based on impulse. There's some great industry reports that we can benchmark from and learn from, especially in fault detection and diagnosis and other types of condition-based monitoring studies. So we can use those as benchmarks and compare that to ourselves and see where we fit and see where that gain might be. And this is where we start to get to, you know, not only hundreds of thousands, but millions or tens of millions of dollars of savings that we can calculate based on making business process changes with the digital twin and having accurate information at our fingertips when we need it. And then we may do a little bit of our own research and start to look at, the impacts operational for system uptime performance, like on a passenger boarding bridge or data availability, very big things, and especially on the ESG, if we start to implement that into our strategy, what's the cost of jet fuel burn with a plane that's still burning jet fuel at the gate or during taxi? So those things are really critical. So that's how we've gamed this out and looked at the different ways that we can save, and then who does that impact, right? So we can't just assume the airport is making that savings. It may be American Airlines, it may be another stakeholder, and that's fine. It's just we need to understand that, and then that's where the partnerships kind of come in line too. Getting American Airlines on board with sponsoring it and embracing the twin when we can calculate the savings that they got out of the program. Next slide. So again, as I mentioned, with the stakeholder conversations, we went through the airport and spoke to pretty much a representation from every single business division, and really looking at, well, what do they care about? Do they care about the information management model? You would think everyone thinks that's important. I certainly feel it's very important. To a leader, they may not care. I mean, that's not the priority. Their priority is, I want predictive analytics, I want quick response time, and I want clear communication, right? And I want to optimize my workforce, as an example. So each of the stakeholders have different business interests. So you want to refine how data is consumed, refine how we're going after particular projects based on their feedback, not our assumptions. That's really important to go through this process. Next slide. And when we start to execute, what it looks like, we're collecting data, we're doing a gap analysis on that data. We may need to figure out in the field if that data is accurate. So we have a field survey team beyond our digital facility infrastructure team, just dedicated to the digital twin project, 6 people that are going out, tagging, tracing. They're actually field verifying information. They're doing Matterport 360 scans, so we have visual records of what we're capturing. We compare that and we bring it into our twin. So next animation there. So the next part of the process, let's click forward if you would, is to load that data into our twin, do the QA checks, build out the system and ontologies and relationships, applying semantic models if need be, leveraging the integrations we've already done. So we integrated already with our GIS, with our BIM platform, already with 5 different computer-aided asset management platforms and maintenance platforms. We've integrated with 3 different building management platforms as well from the IoT sensor perspective. And then we're actively putting analytics on top of that. So that could be rules engine. We've been looking at doing some behavioral models with machine learning on certain assets, et cetera. Next part there. And then the most critical part that we often overlook in this planning is, what is the business process change? So sitting down with our partners, JLL, JBT, and sketching out some of the KPI changes on how they operate, how they respond. How are they going to use this twin effectively and gain that ROI that we set at the beginning? So really critical that we have that in place, that we're continually improving, that we have training and optimization there. And the last part there, last animation, just move forward, has to do with the model. So depending on the complexity of the model, if it's a design model, construction, and we're handing over, we're going to start with that process. But with some of our legacy projects, we can start with the data first. And especially with an older terminal, getting the data first and applying the model as we go just in time. It's been a kind of a shift in the thinking here. Next slide. So one use case I'm going to leave you with is a passenger boarding bridge. This is a simple element model that we would kind of look at from the full building information model. We have different various assets identification in the top corner there. The asset relationships, so the way these assets are related to other parts of that system, whether it be ground equipment or the generator or power from the terminal. We'll see if that's active or not. And this is a knowledge graph, so we can click through this and understand kind of all the things that you would extract from a P&ID drawing, right? Our information management we can also bring in, so our operator manuals and other types of documentation. And then we have our predictive insights in the middle. Next slide, last slide. So last thing here, what we're currently working on with the bridges is actively improving sensors with our GPO for the ground power unit, the PCA for the preconditioned air. We will be looking at when that APU, that the aircraft actually shuts off its engine, We'll be looking at behavior and operational failures that happen that are very high cost impact, and operational failures that can cost the airline a lot of money with different camera systems, and pulling this together so we can measure real time how we can identify issues and correct that behavior in a real time kind of environment. So I'll close with a few thoughts. What you want in a digital twin program is you want to make sure that you involve the people and the process. We look beyond just the information management and business systems and really look deeply at our technology stack, looking at things like flight data, IoT data is really important. And consider the latency between these systems, and looking towards data streaming to connect data is a really important step. But thank you for having me. I'm sorry I went over a little bit.
Great, thanks so much, Kelly. And thank you to all of our presenters today. We have about 10 minutes left in the presentation time, so we'll go ahead and go through some Q&A. If you have any questions that you'd like the panelists to answer, go ahead and drop those in the Q&A. But before we look at that, I'd like to ask if there's any additional resources out there that we could share with the attendees if they'd like more information on digital twin implementation.
And Julie, there's a few resources. I put together a slide. I don't know if it's in the deck, but there's a number of good resources. One is the American Association of Airport Executives put together this digital twin roadmap on the left. And there's a lot of good examples of airports that have developed digital twins and explore some of their use cases a little bit further. Some of whom presented in today's presentation, but there's other airports included as well. And that can be found at the link at the bottom of the page. There's also a research project going on by the American Cooperative Research, the Airport Cooperative Research Program, looking into creating a guidebook for digital twin programs at airports. And that project is nearing completion. It should be available in the springtime of next year. And they've been working on it for about just over a year now. And so there's some really good work that's being done there. And I think you'll all find that a very useful document once it becomes available. And that can be found at the link shown there as well. And then we really should give mention to the Digital Twin Consortium. There are a few slides that reference material from the Digital Twin Consortium, but they have a great body of information out there, including guidebooks, definitions, standards, references, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's another good resource. Thanks, Julie.
Thank you, Randy. Appreciate that. All right, so it looks like there's not currently any open questions. A lot of the questions that came in throughout the presentation were answered via chat. So if you have any that you'd like to ask, go ahead and drop those in and we'll have some live responses. But while we're waiting on that, I'm going to just call out a couple of the questions that came in with chat responses in case I'm not sure everybody can see these. But there were there was an initial question related to buildingSMART's digital twin efforts and asking if there's an active committee that people could join.
And we did answer that in the chat. This is Cindy Baldwin. We do have an active committee. And one of the things about our committee is we're not looking to reinvent the wheel. We are looking to partner with organizations like we have on today's webinar, where we're bringing the working groups that are out there that exist, whether it be through NIBS, the Digital Twin Consortium, buildingSMART USA, ACC, AAAE. So we do have active committees with digital twins and some other efforts, as we mentioned earlier, and we welcome everyone's participation. So thank you for joining the webinar, but also we hope that this discussion continues in these work groups, and we do actively solicit new members and welcome each and every one of you to our group.
Thanks, Cindy. All right, there were quite a few questions that came in about managing the security of data. Does somebody want to talk about data storage and issues with security?
I can make one note here. And one of the things that we're trying to grab our hands around is the fact that we have a lot of different vendors that are handling our data through design and through construction, and getting some rigid governance over that and the storage of those point clouds of our entire plants and airports and BIM models is really important, and holding them accountable to turn that data over and to remove that data from their custody after the project if they don't need it because it's one thing to be able to have your own data security policies internally at the airport. It's quite another to try to ensure your service providers are able to manage your data securely. You can't manage that. So it's really important also for how you're talking to your vendors about where the data modeling is happening, whether it be overseas, that sort of thing. There's going to be some really inherent risks with not managing that effectively.
You know, Julie, I'm being on the panel, I'm not able to ask the question, but if I can vocalize it, my question would be to the presenters, do they have any budget estimates of how much money their efforts have cost to date, how much their owners have invested in their efforts, or any kind of budgets or costing figures that they could share with us?
Who wants to go first?
All I can tell you is that the ROI projected is much higher than the SMIT. I don't think we have permission to share financials, but we're not doing the projects unless there's an ROI clearly established and a path for value. So putting an emphasis on that and checking along the way, doing the POC and then ramping is the strategy. So, but that's really important.
I'll just speak from YVR's perspective. As I mentioned in my notes, we started this journey in digital twinning in 2021. So we're nearly 3 years into this, and we've probably spent rough order of magnitude between 7 to 10 million Canadian on our implementation so far. And to be honest, the majority of that has really just been paying for the associated personnel that we have to develop these different tools. So we have our own in-house development team. We're not contracting it out at all to other companies. We do this all ourselves in-house. So that's rough order of magnitude. And as Kelly just mentioned, we expect the return on that investment to pay back very quickly based on all the efficiencies that are gained.
Dan is in a fairly similar place to YVR in terms of how we've approached it. We're using primarily internal staff to do all of this work, or at least the BIM work, and GIS work and all that. As far as an actual cost, compared to what? Compared to the CAD staff we were maintaining before, BIM staff cost a little bit more, but you know, we haven't added 30 new people. We haven't added a ton of new systems. We're basically working with the same concepts, just approaching them differently. We haven't made huge purchases to this point. What we have gotten out of it is, instead of getting, you know, on an average of 5.5 data points on an asset for maintenance and operations to work with, we're getting in the area of 15 to 17. We're getting 4 times the number of assets captured per square foot on every project that comes in. And we're running into much fewer problems when it comes to coordination and issues with running into unknowns on each consecutive project. Capturing ROI on something like this is really complicated.
The claims reduction,
you know when you're doing it right.
The claims reductions are a really good measure that we've seen dramatic decreases implementing the BIM program on its own through the design construction phases. So those are very quantifiable, but you know, if you haven't done that mapping of exactly how you're going to measure it, it can be very convoluted in measuring, especially with operational issues. So defining it up front is important, and putting in a way to measure it. Otherwise, it is very hard to measure. But you're right, you know, especially when you're starting to put new resources into doing it one way. Well, how were we doing it before, right? And really, how is that impacting the capital costs of our projects with wasted materials and change orders and all these things that happen? You know, clearly the path of BIM modeling is very valuable, and it's a cost reduction in these projects. That's been proven. It's just, what do we do with that into the operation and maintenance, and how to make those investments and connecting that data to those things. But we are starting to measure that in different ways, and I think that that's the exciting part is when we see the adoption and we start to be able to measure those results.
All right, great. Thank you all for your responses to the questions today. We're right at time for the webinar. I just want to remind everybody that if you have any suggestions for future webinar topics, go ahead and drop those in the chat before you leave. But thank you all for your attendance today, and a special thank you to our panelists, our moderators, and buildingSMART and ACC for hosting the webinar. And then just a quick reminder that today's presentation was recorded and will be available for viewing on buildingSMART's website following the presentation today. So thank you, and hope everybody has a great day.